What would you do if, one snowy night, your teenage daughter brought home an injured baby Bigfoot? This isn't a fairy tale. It really happened in the early 1990s, deep in the Trinity Alps of Northern California, and this family kept the creature hidden for 6 whole years. The truth is, Bigfoot isn't a monster. They play harmonica, communicate with knocking sounds, and leave braided branches and crescent-shaped stone circles as loving messages. While hunters chase them for profit, one family chose to protect, heal, and love. This story is told through the personal journals of Hollis, the girl who raised the young Bigfoot, whom they named Little Echo, and connected with him using rhythms, cedar branches, and heart. In this video, you'll discover how Echo's mother left willow bark as medicine when he had a deadly fever, why a local doctor treated Echo but told no one, and the sacred farewell ritual in autumn 1996, when Hollis wrapped Echo in a handmade quilt, stepping back to let mother and child reunite. The evidence still lingers: braided twigs, distant knocks in snowy nights, and that quilt marked Echo, hanging quietly by the fireplace. Don't scroll away, because if you believe love only exists between humans, this story will change everything. The rain came down hard that night, a steady drumming on tin and wood, carrying with it the sharp tang of iron and earth, a smell that clung to every breath Harlan drew. The back fields of the Greeley place lay sodden, the mud thick and shining under the ghost light of the storm. He was halfway through latching the horse barn when he heard it, an unfamiliar cry that didn't belong to any foal or calf. Thin, strained, and wrong in a way that made the hairs lift on his arms. Too human to ignore, too distorted to dismiss. He froze, breath clouding in the cold, listening through the hiss of rain. Again it came, high and trembling, caught in the rhythm of the storm. Something calling for help. Something small, lantern in hand. He crossed the back pasture, boots sinking with each step, the world around him muffled under the sweep of water. The sound drew him toward the edge of the old cut lot, where stumps jutted like broken teeth. There, in the flicker of his lantern, he saw movement tangled in the glint of wire, a small, furred shape, flailing weakly against strands of barbed fence, sides heaving, dark fur slicked to the skin, streaked with blood. The smell of wet metal hung thick, bitter as rust on the tongue. Harlan's chest tightened. Not a foal, not a dog, not anything he'd ever seen. He crouched low, his lantern shaking as the creature turned its face toward him. Wide eyes, glimmering amber in the stormlight, rimmed with pain and terror. The barbs had cut deep into its shoulder, its thigh, leaving long tears in the hide. It made a sound then, a broken sob, so close to a child's that Harlan's stomach dropped. He muttered under his breath, a wordless reassurance no one could hear, and stripped off his coat to drape across the thrashing body. The wire bit his hands as he pried it apart, ignoring the sting as blood welled on his own palms. With a sudden give, the fence loosened, and the small body tumbled into his arms, trembling, heat seeping through sodden fur. The storm roared overhead as he carried the weight back across the pasture, careful to keep it close to his chest, careful to shield it from the sight lines of any passing headlights on the road beyond. His boots slipped in the muck, but he pushed forward, breath ragged, until the barn doors closed behind him with a hollow slam. Horses shifted in their stalls, ears twitching at the scent of blood. Lantern light flickered against beams, against old quilts draped along the rails, against the anxious face of Mabel as she hurried from the feed room. She didn't ask what it was. She only looked once at the soaked fur, the wounds, the glimmer of something almost human in its eyes, and then set her jaw. From a shelf above the tack trunk she pulled a jar, thick with resin the color of amber. The scent of cedar rose sharp and clean as she unscrewed the lid. With practiced hands, she smeared the sticky salve along the worst of the cuts. Hollis, wide-eyed, had appeared at the doorway, her hair plastered to her cheeks from running through rain. She pressed close, her gaze caught by the creature's trembling, the way it curled small as a fawn against the quilt Mabel slid beneath it. There was something strange in the wounds. The fur bore traces of the same resin, old and hardened, as if someone had tried to tend them before. Mabel's brows knit. She knew then what she didn't say aloud. The mother had been there, doing what she could, before fear of metal or men drove her back. The creature whimpered, pressing itself deeper into the corner of the stall. Hollis lowered herself beside it, quilt pooled in her lap. She reached out slowly, every movement soft, until her palm hovered above the shaking ribs. The small thing lifted its head, eyes wide, and then, with a sudden trust, it leaned against her, burying its ear against her chest. Hollis stilled, the weight of the moment pressing into her, and then she let out a slow breath, letting her heartbeat be the rhythm. The creature seemed to listen, tiny hand pressing against the fabric of her shirt, as though memorizing the cadence. From the shadows, Harlan watched, torn between fear and awe. Mabel draped another quilt, her hands never faltering, stitching the beginning of something fragile, something they would have to guard. Hollis reached for the old cassette radio perched atop a wooden crate. She clicked it on, and the faint crackle of tape filled the stall before a slow waltz crept through the static. The childlike creature cocked its head, then pressed both palms against the crate, feeling the hum through the wood. Its low hum joined the rhythm, not words but resonance, a body speaking in sound. Outside, the storm carried another voice. Faint through the rain, distant but deliberate, came a pattern of knocks, one long, two short. A call from the tree line, a mother's lullaby. From farther off, slower, deeper, 3 knocks rolled like a drum, steady as a guardian's watch. Mabel stiffened, her needle paused mid-air. Hollis held her breath, eyes flicking to the stall door. Harlan moved quick to douse the lantern, plunging the barn into shadows broken only by storm light seeping through the cracks. At that very moment, footsteps scraped across gravel. A man's voice slurred in the rain, a drunk neighbor muttering to himself as he staggered past the Greeley property. The horses snorted, restless. Mabel pulled the curtain across the small window, her fingers trembling only slightly. In the dark, the little creature went still against Hollis, breath held as if it too understood the danger of sound. They waited, hearts pounding in silence, until the steps wandered past and faded into the storm. The quiet that followed was thick, almost holy. Mabel lit a smaller lamp, just enough to see the stitches she pulled through cloth. She chose blue thread and began to shape letters, one after another, careful and slow. E-C-H-O. Hollis watched her grandmother's hands move, the steady rhythm of needle and thread as though anchoring them all. When the quilt was laid beside the small body, the name glowed faint in the lamplight. Hollis set a cedar branch across the stall's door frame, the resin glistening where bark had split, a wordless greeting offered to whatever watched from the trees. Later, when the storm's fury began to ease, Hollis noticed again the patterns in the fur, fresh resin mingled with old new cuts layered on top of healing ones, proof that the mother had found the child before, had tried to heal, but had stopped short at the line where metal bit the earth. The realization settled heavy in Hollis's chest. This little one had been caught between two worlds, tended by both, saved by neither, until tonight. The barn exhaled with them, the smell of cedar and wet horse filling every corner. Hollis leaned her cheek against the damp fur, listening to the steadying breath, the faint hum of the cassette waltz still lingering. Somewhere beyond the fence line, a tree groaned under wind, and in the hollow of the night there was the echo of what might come next. Silence that carried promise, silence that warned of the cost of keeping secrets. And so it began, in a storm that smelled of metal and blood, with a girl's heart pressed close to a creature not meant for cages. What they had gathered into the barn that night was not just a wounded body, but a thread that tied them to the shadows of the forest. Out there, a mother waited, calling softly, patient but unyielding. Inside, a family began to weave themselves into a promise they could never speak aloud, a promise that would carry into the nights to come. The frost came early that winter, curling over the fence posts and creeping through the low fog that hung across the back field like breath held too long. By late December, the Greeleys had raised the tall wooden fence Hollis had whispered about, its panels high and weather-worn, stitched together with care, not haste. It didn't look new. That was the point. Just another old country fence, blending with the pines, hiding something precious behind its plain boards. From the road, it was invisible. From the sky, it was shadows. But inside, for the first time, Echo had space. He didn't run at first. Just stood, blinking against the frost-heavy air, his breath fogging in tiny bursts. The scars on his shoulder had begun to knit, fur growing back in uneven tufts. His bare feet sank into cold straw and frozen soil, but he didn't seem to flinch. He looked up, wide-eyed, then climbed. One leap, and he caught the beam halfway up the post. His arms were long and lean, fast. Hollis gasped softly as she watched from behind the barn door, harmonica still in hand, the last note of her melody trailing off into the morning hush. Echo spun around the post like a dancer, his body loose but certain, and perched near the top, head tilted to catch the early sun. A sound came out of him, half hum, half chirp, like he was tuning himself to the world. Later, when the shadows stretched, Hollis stood beside the cedar stump she'd dragged into the yard. Hollowed at the top like a drum, it was slick with sap that never fully dried. She tapped it softly. 2 knocks. Pause. Again. Echo cocked his head, crept closer. She tapped 3 times, quick, sharp. He froze. A low growl curled in his throat, but his eyes never left her hands. She tapped once, long. Waited. Then 2 short. She let it echo. He stepped forward, tapped the edge. Twice. Pause. Then tapped his chest. Hollis smiled, heart swelling. He was listening. Learning. The code grew with them. 2 knocks meant safe. 3 meant hide. 1 long and 2 short. The call from the trees, the call they both remembered in their bones. He picked it up fast, smarter than she ever dared say aloud. She taught with rhythm, he answered in movement. They didn't speak the same, but they understood the same music. And then came the morning when she found it, wedged on the top rail of the fence, a branch, cedar, braided tight in the middle like fingers twined in prayer. The twist was odd, too neat to be wind. Hollis held it in both hands, breathing in the clean green scent. The braid wasn't hers. It wasn't Mabel's. It was a message. A mother's marker. She didn't say anything to Harlan. Just tucked it beneath Echo's quilt that night and sang 3 notes on her harmonica, soft and slow. Echo curled tighter, clutching the edge of the cloth, as if the scent was part of some dream he didn't want to wake from. Snow came heavy the next week, blanketed the yard, swallowed footprints by morning, but nothing stayed hidden forever. On a Wednesday afternoon, 2 boys from town came riding up the lane on old bikes, skidding in the gravel like they owned the world. They were friends of Hollis's from school, if you could call them that. One of them had a BB gun slung across his back. They weren't supposed to be here. Hollis met them at the front gate, heart hammering. The barn behind her looked innocent enough, but she could feel him moving inside, feel his weight against the air. "Thought you guys were still snowed in," she lied. "Uncle's plow cleared it," one said, chewing gum. "Heard y'all had something weird back here, like a raccoon or something." She laughed too loud, too fast. "Just chickens." The other one squinted past her. "Swear I saw something move. back by the fence." "Wind," she said, stepping in front of him. And then from behind the barn came a rustle, faint but wrong. One of the boys stepped sideways to look. Hollis grabbed a rock from the ground and threw it hard into the woods, past the barn, into the trees. A loud crack. Both boys turned. "Coyotes," she said. "We get 'em sometimes." They didn't look convinced, but the BB gun boy shrugged. "You're weird anyway," he muttered. They pedaled off, tires spitting gravel. She didn't run back, not yet, just walked, slow and careful, around the fence to the back gate. Opened it. A space beyond that only Echo knew. He waited there, hidden in the line of bare trees, breath frosting in the cold. She tapped twice on the cedar stump, waited, then again. From the darkness he answered. 2 knocks, lighter than hers. That evening, as dusk bled into the bones of the woods, something new appeared. Stones, small, flat, pale, set in a crescent just outside the barn steps. Not random, not scattered, placed. A shape that felt like a doorway. Mabel saw it first. She didn't say a word. Just stood there staring, arms folded against her apron, and nodded once. Later, she told Hollis, "It's not just the child that's learning." That night the cold deepened. Harlan stayed late in town, working the back line at the mill, but Hollis sat with Echo in the hay, the quilt wrapped around both of them, the harmonica soft in her hands. She played low, slow notes, not even a song, just breath in and out, like she was singing him calm. He pressed his forehead to her arm. Somewhere out in the night, a long knock sounded, then 2 short. Hollis didn't flinch, just reached for the quilt and pulled it tighter. The fence was holding, for now. But under the frost, the soil was shifting. Someone was watching from the woods, someone who had waited through seasons, who marked time not by calendars, but by scent, by ritual, by the rhythm of the trees. Someone who braided cedar the way a woman might braid her daughter's hair. The next morning, just before light, Hollis stepped barefoot into the snow, drawn by something she couldn't name. She passed the crescent of stones, brushing her fingertips across the tops. The frost stung her skin. At the top of the fence, in the pale hush before sunrise, another branch waited, braided longer this time. Softer. It hung there like a banner, like a promise. She reached for it and didn't cry. Not exactly, but her throat caught. From inside the barn came the sound of movement, small hands shifting hay, a breath against the cold. Later, when Harlan came home, she told him they needed another gate, one that led deeper, behind the barn, into the pines. Somewhere no one else would follow. Somewhere Echo could run if he needed to. He didn't ask why. He didn't argue. Just nodded once and passed her the last of the cedar planks. She didn't tell him about the branch. Didn't tell him about the stones. But that night, when she laid the harmonica beside Echo's hands and tapped gently against the crate, she felt the rhythm settle between them like a language. 2 knocks. Then silence. But not the empty kind. The kind that meant someone was still out there, waiting, and the space between was only temporary. The kind that held breath instead of ending it. And somewhere, beyond the edge of the fence, the forest was listening too. The wind picked up just after nightfall, sharp and sudden, blowing hard through the trees until the frost-laced branches scraped against one another like bones. Hollis had been sitting in the loft, knees tucked beneath her chin, watching the condensation gather along the edge of the barn window. Echo was curled nearby in the hay, nestled beneath the quilt, the hum of the cassette radio humming low from the crate beside him, a waltz moving like memory through the wooden walls. The heater had sputtered earlier, and now only the horse's slow shifting and the distant whistle of wind filled the dark between songs. Outside, the glass panes fogged, then cleared in breathy waves. Hollis traced a shape with her finger, something like a spiral, then wiped it away. Her reflection disappeared with it. She stood to check the latch on the back stall, her boots quiet on the wooden slats, her breath showing in the cold air. Echo stirred slightly as she passed, reaching one small hand toward the crate, pressing his palm gently against the rhythm. It happened in a flash. A loud slap against the glass. A man's voice, slurred and angry. "What the hell is that?" The sound hit them like a gunshot. Echo's body jolted upright, his hands flailing blindly toward the light. His face twisted, not in anger, but in something deeper, something ancient. He lunged forward, hitting the edge of the window, eyes wide with panic. Hollis screamed his name, too late. His arm crashed through the pane, the sound of glass shattering swallowed by the wind. A long gash split open across his forearm. Blood smeared the edge of the stall as he recoiled, clutching the wound. Mabel came running from the house in her slippers, bathrobe half open, her breath fogging like smoke in the frigid air. She reached them just as Hollis was wrapping Echo's arm in an old towel. His breathing was wild, ragged, high-pitched whines escaping between clenched teeth. He rocked forward and back, his other hand tapping frantically against the side of the crate. 1, 2, 1, 2, then 3, fast. "It's okay," Hollis whispered, pressing her hand to his chest. "You're okay. I've got you." But it was too much. The blood, the glass, the sound. Echo hunched into the corner, his face buried against the quilt, his whole body shaking. Mabel didn't waste time. She grabbed the phone off the barn wall, listened, cursed. Storm knocked it out. Her eyes flicked toward the road. "We'll go to Bates. Quiet." 10 minutes later, they were in the truck. Echo swaddled in a second quilt in Hollis's arms, a strip of cloth tied around the bleeding arm. Harlan drove with both hands clenched tight on the wheel, headlights dim under the sleet. The truck slid once on a patch of ice but kept steady toward the outer edge of town. The vet's house was dark except for one soft yellow lamp in a back window. Harlan killed the engine, then knocked on the rear door twice. Lionel Bates answered with his coat already on. He said nothing, just stepped aside. Inside the exam room, the light was low and warm, the smell of cedar stronger than antiseptic. Echo sat still on the metal table, blinking in the dim. Hollis stayed beside him, her hand never leaving his. Bates took one look and nodded toward the cabinet. Top shelf, livestock kit, green label. Mabel handed it over. He cleaned the wound in silence, his hands careful. The label on the jar read, "For livestock only," in faded red block letters. If anyone asked, it was nothing more than a goat or a bad-tempered dog. But no one asked. When Bates wrapped the arm, he layered gauze like he was tucking in a story he didn't dare tell. Then he stepped back and looked at the boy without asking what he was. "I've patched worse," he said quietly. "But this one's different." His eyes met Harlan's. "You'll need to be careful now, more careful than before." They left without another word. In the truck, Echo curled again into Hollis, the wind pressing cold against the windows. Mabel stared out at the woods, silent. Harlan kept his eyes on the road. At home, the glass shards were swept, the blood scrubbed off the boards. But something remained. The next morning, while washing the outside of the barn window, Hollis saw it, right there on the lower right corner of the frame. A handprint. Not hers, not Echo's. Too wide, too long, and pressed into the dust like it had been left in warning or protection. It was faded now, half melted by dew, but still visible. 5 fingers. She stared at it for a long time, then slowly raised her hand and placed her palm over it. It covered her entire hand and more. That evening, Hollis brought the harmonica out again. The song on the cassette had worn thin, the tape warbling. She didn't press play. Instead, she tapped the side of the crate. 2 knocks. Waited. Echo looked up. She tapped again. He moved toward her slowly, his arm still bandaged, but his breathing calm. She lifted the harmonica to her lips and played 3 short notes, the waltz rhythm echoing off the wooden walls. Echo listened, then hummed back, soft, low, like a secret remembered. From the edge of the fence, too far to see but close enough to feel, came a sound that didn't belong to the wind. One long, two short. Mabel stepped to the door of the barn, wrapped in her thickest coat. She looked at Hollis, then at the sky, then out toward the dark where the sound had come from. "She's still there," she said softly. "She never left." And neither did they. The fence stayed. The windows were patched, but Echo didn't go near the glass again. He flinched when light hit at the wrong angle, flinched at the sound of metal. Hollis moved the crate to the center of the barn, away from the walls. The quilt was washed but still held a faint smell of cedar, of something wild and old. At night, the cassette waltz played quieter. At night, the knocks came more often. Some light, some distant, some slow and heavy, like a breath being held in the forest. And every time Echo heard them, he tapped back. 2 gentle knocks on the side of the crate. He was learning not just rhythm, but ritual. And Hollis, she was learning too. Not just how to hide a secret, but how to carry one. How to build a language where none had existed. How to cradle something strange and scared in her arms. And call it by name, even if she never spoke the word aloud. She began to hum more often. Not full songs, just notes. 3 short notes. 1 drawn out. 2 soft ones after. Sometimes, Echo answered in 3s. Sometimes, he just curled into her side, listening. Outside, the frost crept back in. The horses grew restless again. The nights stretched longer. But the rhythm remained, even when the sky stayed black for hours. Even when no one knocked, they kept the ritual alive. Because that's what you do when something broken finds its way into your hands. You don't ask where it came from. You just keep it warm and wait for the forest to decide what comes next. The days began getting longer, but the warmth didn't follow. Cold hung around the Greeley place like a breath held too long. The frost never quite left the porch railings, and the wood stove burned later into the morning. Echo stayed mostly inside the barn now, quieter than he'd been in weeks, as if something had shifted in him. The glass incident had changed the air. There was more watchfulness now, more silence. Hollis had started sleeping in the tack room again, just to be near. The rhythm they'd built, the 2 knocks, the hums, the soft harmonica notes, held steady. But the world outside was louder now. It came in through the walls, in the mail Harlan brought in late and burned after reading, in the looks Mabel started giving the windows, in the smell of too much cedar simmering on the stove, trying to cover something up. Then one morning a knock that wasn't part of any code. Official, sharp, too fast. A state car in the driveway. Woman in a gray coat. Clipboards. Sunglasses, even though it was cloudy. Mabel didn't flinch. She opened the door slow, eyes level. Harlan stepped behind her, arms crossed, saying nothing. "We've had reports," the woman said, reading from her folder. "Concerns about the welfare of a minor living here. Possible endangerment, possible unauthorized animal activity." The words were meant to sound like facts. They weren't. Mabel forced a smile. "You're welcome to look around, miss." "Keen," the woman replied. "Of course." Hollis stood frozen at the top of the stairs, clutching the banister so hard her knuckles turned white. She knew the name before the woman even turned fully to look at her. Behind her, a second figure stepped through the door, wearing too much perfume and not enough apology. "Hi, sweetheart," Darla said. Hollis didn't answer. They walked through the house slow, poking into corners like they were looking for ghosts. Mabel offered pie she hadn't baked. Hollis lingered near the back door, her heart thudding like hooves in her throat. Out in the barn, Echo was tucked into the thicket of hay beneath the old chest with the false lid. They'd practiced this, him curling quiet, quilt over his head, her harmonica tucked under the straw for comfort. The cedar branch hung at the stall's edge like a charm. Keen sniffed the air near the barn, nose twitching. "What's that smell?" "Cleaning oil," Mabel lied. "And some sap I use for arthritis." Darla squinted at the edges of the stall. The ground was swept too clean. the air too still. "There's something in here," she murmured. But before she could step forward, the oven timer inside the house dinged loud and sharp. Hollis bolted for it. "Pie's burning," she called out. Mabel coughed and turned. Keen hesitated, then followed. Darla lingered a moment longer, her hand brushing the rough beam of the stall. She didn't see the shimmer of movement in the shadows behind the false lid. She didn't hear the faint, practiced knock beneath the hay. 2 soft taps, like breath. Back inside, over burnt crust and cooled coffee, Keen flipped pages on her clipboard. "There's been an anonymous letter," she said. "Claims this property is harboring an illegal or dangerous animal." Language was specific. Harlan's jaw twitched. "Let me guess. Use the phrase, wild primate." Keen raised an eyebrow. "It did." He stood and walked into the other room. Came back with a small scrap of paper, unfolded twice. On it, the exact same phrase. Same handwriting. "Found this in our mailbox weeks ago. No name, just that." Keen held the note up, compared them silently. "Where'd you get that?" Darla asked, voice too sharp. Harlan didn't answer. Outside, the wind picked up again. It always did when things went wrong. That night, Mabel boiled cedar resin until the whole house smelled like smoke and sap. She stirred it too long. Let it blacken at the edges. "I used to do this for your uncle," she said softly, not looking up. "When he was little, after the fever, after the woods took him for a whole night and brought him back different." Hollis didn't speak, just watched the resin drip from the spoon like tar. "I thought if I kept him warm enough, he'd stay." Later, Mabel sat at the kitchen table with her sewing kit. She stitched slowly, eyes strained, her hands cramping in the cold. On a new piece of cloth, the same blue thread looped through the same curved needle. The quilt was small, not as thick as Echo's. A message more than a blanket. "You know what I'm doing?" she asked. Hollis nodded. "You're tying things down before they float off." Mabel smiled without smiling. Close enough. Outside, the barn was dark. Inside, Echo traced his fingers across the edge of the harmonica, the way a child might trace their name in frost. Hollis watched him, her breath shallow. "I think she meant well," she said, not looking at him. He didn't answer. "Just tapped once on the crate." She tapped back. 2 knocks. Safe. The next morning, a paper slipped under the porch door. It wasn't from Keen. It wasn't official. The handwriting was clean. Expensive ink. 1 sentence. "That thing in your barn could be worth a hell of a lot." No name, no return address, but the perfume on the corner smelled like Darla. Harlan burned it in the sink. For 3 nights, Echo wouldn't hum, wouldn't knock, just lay curled beneath the quilt, eyes open long past midnight. On the 4th night, Hollis left the stall door open and went to the edge of the field. She brought the harmonica and the quilt and the empty crate. She didn't call out, just played 1 long note, then 2 short. The old rhythm. She left the quilt at the edge of the woods, just beneath the trees. The next morning, it was gone. But in its place, there was something else. Small, round, gray-white. Not a rock, not shaped like one. Smooth like glass. Light caught in it strange. Quartz, maybe. But warmer. She placed it beside the harmonica. Echo touched it once, then looked at her. He didn't smile, not exactly. But the fear in his face lifted, just slightly. That evening, Mabel handed Hollis a folded paper she hadn't seen before. A drawing. A pattern of stones in a curve. A crescent. "She's getting closer," Mabel said. "She's watching," Hollis whispered. And that was enough to start the next move, because it was no longer about hiding. Not entirely. It was about choosing the moment to let go. But not yet. First, they had to build the path, and make sure no one else could follow it. The wind had changed. It didn't howl or whip like before. It moved low now, beneath the brush, carrying something heavier than weather. Hollis first noticed it near the cedar stump, standing in the back pasture alone. Echo wouldn't go near it. Not anymore. He'd become stiller these past few nights. pressing his ear to the ground, then looking west with eyes that didn't blink, as if something out there had started calling, something that wasn't his mother. The first time it happened, Hollis thought it was just the wind catching a pipe, a shrill, reedy sound, broken and off-pitch. But then it happened again the next night, longer, higher, hollow like a bad flute. Then came the metallic clank, sharp, deliberate, not part of any rhythm she knew. From the ridge above the pasture, a soft light flickered. Not a star, not fire, something man-made. Echo dropped low behind the fence and let out a sound she hadn't heard before, more breath than growl. That morning, Harlan found the edge of a reed call tossed in the brush, the kind hunters used to mimic elk or wounded game. Next to it, an empty can with the bottom dented in from repeated strikes. "They're trying to bring him out," Harlan said, voice low. Not knowing what they're calling, Mabel didn't say a word. She just opened the kitchen drawer and pulled out the thick quilted bag that always meant one thing. It was time to move. By sundown, the back of the old pickup was packed tight. No headlights, no engine yet. Just the weight of a plan that had already begun forming days ago. A new place. A cabin further out, halfway up the old Canyon Creek trail, long abandoned and near collapse, but far from the noise, the watchers, the traps. Hollis folded Echo's quilt into the wooden crate and lined it with straw, then slid in the harmonica and the cedar branch with the blue thread still knotted at the base. Echo sat beside the fence, quiet, watching her. She lifted the lid just halfway. "Only for the ride," she said gently. "You won't stay in it." He didn't move, but he didn't resist. She tapped the crate twice, then paused. Then 3 slow knocks. His fingers curled around the rim. Mabel brought out a jar of fresh sap, the color of dark amber, warm from the stove. She handed it to Harlan. "For masking scent, you'll need it once you pass the North Ridge." She didn't ask how they knew. She didn't question the road. She just pressed the jar into his hand and stepped back. By nightfall, the truck crept down the dirt trail with its lights off, tires crunching soft over gravel and wet pine. Hollis rode in the back, arms around the crate. Echo's eyes peered through the slats, catching starlight in shards. Then, just before they reached the first bend, a knock, loud, from the ridge above. Then again, but this time, 3 knocks. Echo stiffened. Hollis turned her head toward the sound. And then it came, one long, 2 short. It didn't come from the truck bed. It came from the trees, somewhere not far ahead. She tapped back without thinking, 3 short knocks against the crate. Echo's fingers lifted toward the lid. Harlan slowed the truck. Something moved up ahead, just out of range of the high beams. Not large, not walking. Something placed. 3 stones, one on top of the other, set in a shallow V between 2 trees. He swerved gently to the right, taking the slope off the trail. It wasn't a road anymore. It was memory. Another knock, this time to their left. Echo shifted in the crate, tapping once, hard. And then, up on the ridge, Hollis saw her. Not clearly, not face, but shape. A silhouette darker than the dark around it. Standing still against the sky. Tall, still, watching. She didn't come closer. She didn't speak. She just stood, then lifted her hand, slow and straight, and knocked 3 times against the base of a tree. Harlan turned the wheel again. Off-road now, tires slipping through pine needles. The sound of the hunters was behind them, metallic, fake, clumsy. But this was a path, a marked way. The forest opened up only once, a clearing, faintly ringed by fallen logs. Beyond it, the half-rotted cabin sat leaning into itself. The door hung askew. Moss dripped from the eaves. But Hollis saw it first, right there by the door. A circle, stones, a crescent. And in the center, laid gently atop the pine mulch, 3 feathers braided with cedar bark. She stepped out of the truck before it stopped moving. Walked slow, every breath showing in the air. Echo stepped down behind her, his bare feet silent. He crossed the circle. She didn't stop him. He went to the cabin door, placed his palm on the frame, and let out a low hum, one she hadn't heard since before the glass, before the blood. Then he turned to her. She pulled out the cedar branch with the blue thread, laid it in the doorway. Inside, the air was stale but still. The dust didn't move. The floor creaked only once. That night, they didn't light a fire. They laid quiet. The wind shifted once. In the morning, just as the mist began lifting from the ground, Echo stepped outside and began placing stones. Small ones, round, pale gray, a half circle, then 2 more. He tapped once against the door frame. Hollis tapped back. Behind the cabin, Harlan found new tracks. Not echoes, not boots. Larger, deeper, paced along the outer edge of the trees. Watching, never crossing. The mother had come in the night and left them space. For the first time in weeks, Mabel sat alone near the cedar stump. No tea, no knitting, just hands folded in her lap. She looked out toward the woods as if expecting someone to sit beside her. When no one came, she placed her hand on the cold bark and knocked 3 times, then waited and waited until the trees knocked back. But not 3, not 1, just silence, and in it, peace. The rain came slow that morning, not loud or punishing, just steady and warm, a spring-like hush in the middle of summer. It hit the old tin roof of the Canyon Creek cabin like it had been waiting, soft and careful, almost shy. But beneath that soft patter was something else, a stillness in the air, something quieter than rain, something wrong. Echo wouldn't eat. At first, Hollis thought he was just tired. He'd been quiet all week, resting more, watching the trees with a kind of focus that made her uneasy. But this was different. His breathing was off, slower, shallower. When she placed her hand on his forehead, his skin felt hot, too hot, like metal left in sun. She called his name softly. He didn't lift his head. She pressed her fingers to his wrist. The pulse fluttered. Outside, the trees bent in the wind. The ground smelled of damp pine and something sweet. Hollis looked to the edge of the clearing, half hoping to see her, tall and silent, watching from the trees. But there was nothing. Not yet. Mabel stepped inside just as Hollis was wetting another cloth. She didn't need to ask. One look and she knew. "He's burning up," Hollis whispered. Mabel nodded once, already pulling the kit from the shelf. She dipped her fingers into the jar of cedar sap, rubbed a bit along Echo's chest, just below the collarbone. He flinched slightly but didn't resist. His eyes stayed half-lidded, unfocused. "We need to cool him," Mabel said. "And fast," Hollis added. They placed damp cloths along his spine, his neck, his wrists. Harlan pulled the truck halfway out of the tree line, in case they needed to move fast. But none of it felt fast enough. The fever wasn't going down. Then came the sound, not from the trees, from the cabin porch. Something light, something deliberate. Hollis opened the door. Rain drizzled over the eaves, dripping from the corners of the roof in thin lines. And sitting neatly at the threshold, 3 strips of willow bark. 1 chewed, 2 still damp, bitter and broken at the ends. She bent to pick them up, still warm. "She's been here," Mabel said, stepping behind her. She knew. Hollis didn't wait. She boiled the bark in the small kettle, crushed it down with the back of a spoon, strained the water through cheesecloth, and let it cool. Echo wouldn't take it at first, so she soaked the edge of a rag and let him suck the moisture through it. Bitterness curled his lip, but he drank. Hours passed. The rain didn't stop. The fever didn't break. They couldn't wait any longer. "We'll take him to Bates," Hollis said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "He'll know what to do." Harlan looked out at the mud path, at the slope beyond it, at the sharp edge where the road dropped toward town. "If we go," he said, "we don't come back here for a while. Then we go," Hollis said, "because if we don't, he won't last." They loaded the crate carefully, lined it with the quilt, tucked the harmonica beneath Echo's side. He was barely conscious. his breath a slow whistle through his nose. Mabel dabbed his forehead with the last of the willow water. Harlan packed a tin of sap in the glove box. They didn't turn on the headlights. Not yet. Halfway down the trail, they heard it. Behind them, somewhere deep in the thickets, the sound of tires. Rubber over wet gravel. Not their own. Then, the call. The same reedy screech they'd heard days before. Higher now, closer, not echoing, but chasing. Harlan pulled the wheel left, off the trail, down a cut between trees he hadn't driven in years. The truck rocked hard, tires catching on roots. Echo stirred once, eyes fluttering. Then knocks, loud, from the ridge ahead. 1, 2, 3. Steady, commanding. Another knock. This time from behind. Tinny, off rhythm. Imitation. Then, from the right. 3 more. Deep, resonant, close. 2 shapes emerged at the edge of the ridge. Not clear, not near, but massive. Moving between trees. One tall and broad. The other narrower, but with the same rolling gait. They didn't run. They didn't speak. They just stood. Between the truck and the hunters, Harlan took the turn wide, letting the trees swallow them. No one followed. By the time they reached Hayfork, the rain had turned cold again. The vet's porch light was off, but the back door was unlocked. Mabel carried the quilt. Hollis carried Echo. Harlan stayed at the wheel, engine running. Inside, the air was quiet. Bates stood waiting, already in his coat. Gloves pulled on tight. "You didn't call," he said softly. "The line's down," Mabel said. "I figured." He opened the back room, cleared the table, unwrapped the quilt. His fingers moved fast, checking pulse, breath, eyes, ribs. He didn't ask what Echo was. He hadn't asked before. He didn't need to. "This is close," he murmured. "Too close." He took out a jar marked for livestock and another without a label at all. A clear bottle, faintly pink. "Won't cure him," he said, "but might buy him time." He injected the mix slow, just beneath the skin, then bandaged the arm again. Echo whimpered once, turned his face into Hollis's chest. "You'll need to keep him warm, real warm. Cedar smoke on the way back. It'll cover the scent." "Will he make it?" Hollis asked. Bates didn't answer right away. "If he rests, if he's kept dry, and if the forest keeps favoring you." That night, back at the cabin, they lit cedar chips in a shallow tin tray and let the smoke coil through the corners. Mabel burned it thick until her own eyes stung. Hollis kept Echo wrapped in both quilts. His fingers were cold, but his breath came easier. He slept through the night. In the morning, the fever had dropped. He opened his eyes, looked at her, and tapped once, then twice. Safe. She didn't cry, but her chest ached like something had cracked open and poured out. Later, while sweeping the porch, Hollis noticed something new on the railing. Braided grass, thin and tight, damp from the rain, wrapped once around the base of the post. Next to it, a pebble. Round, white, smooth as glass. She picked it up, turned it over in her hand, then looked to the trees. The forest didn't speak, but it remembered, and somewhere out there, so did she. By the time the sky turned copper, the cabin was already silent. No fire burned in the stove, no radio murmured in the corner. The air inside had settled, heavy like breath held too long, as if the walls themselves knew what was coming. Mabel stood alone on the porch with her hands folded over the last finished stitch. The quilt lay across her arm, freshly washed, already carrying the name stitched in soft blue, a name never spoken too loud, never written on any paper but now sewn into fabric like a promise. Echo. The light was gold but fading fast. Mist curled at the edges of the trees, not the kind that obscured, but the kind that made everything sacred. No one said it was time. They just moved. Harlan walked to the edge of the field and looked out toward the ring. His hand hovered near his chest, then dropped. Hollis stood barefoot in the cabin's threshold, her hair tied back, the cedar branch with the blue thread resting gently in her palm. She didn't blink as the first knock echoed through the valley. 3. Deep, slow. Not loud, just final. Mabel moved toward the clearing first, quilt in hand. She stepped with care, as though every pine needle underfoot might whisper too much. Hollis followed behind her, the harmonica in her pocket. Echo stayed close to her side, not holding on, not clinging, just near, like the rhythm of a second heartbeat. The crescent of stones was wider now. Mabel had spent all morning shaping it, resetting it, leaving the center open like a gate. In the hush before sundown, it looked like the rib cage of something sleeping, hollow, waiting. Inside the curve, the ground was cleared of leaves. A single line had been drawn in the dirt. One side was theirs, the other was not. No one had told her to draw it. But her hand had known what to do. Hollis knelt just shy of the stones. Her knees sank into the damp earth. She reached into her pocket, took out the harmonica, and played 3 notes. No song, no melody, just 3. Soft, slow, familiar. The sound barely rose above the wind. Echo stood beside her and placed his small hand on her shoulder, then moved it to her chest, then stepped forward. Hollis touched his back for the last time, light, as if brushing off dust. He turned and pressed his fingers gently to her collarbone, the same place she'd cooled him with willow water weeks ago. Then his hand moved to her heart. He held it there just a second longer, and then he stepped inside the circle. Mabel unfolded the quilt. Hollis rose and took it from her. She walked to the edge of the stones, held it out with both hands. Echo didn't reach for it. Instead, he turned to face the trees. The mist parted just slightly. A tall figure moved forward, slow as dusk. Not loud, not sudden. She didn't walk like people walk. She swayed with the trees. Her fur was darker than the sky behind her. Her shoulders rose like mountains, and her eyes caught the light in ways that made them look older than time. Her hands, wide, strong, silent, were empty. She stepped into the circle like she'd been there before. Maybe she had. No one spoke. No one moved. Hollis stepped back and placed the cedar branch with the blue thread down across the edge of the circle. Not inside, not outside, right on the line. The mother stopped, looked at it, then lowered herself to one knee. Not kneeling in submission, but in reverence. Echo walked toward her. Before he reached her, he turned once more to look at Hollis. Just once. She smiled. He didn't. He only tilted his head slightly, like he always did when listening for rain. Then he turned back and pressed his palm to his mother's. She pressed hers to his heart. The wind shifted. Then the mother reached down and placed something on the ground before Mabel's feet. Round, white, smooth. A polished piece of quartz, glinting like bone in the dusk. Mabel didn't bend to pick it up. Not yet. She just whispered, so soft no one heard the words but the trees. Then Hollis stepped forward and wrapped the quilt around Echo's shoulders. Slowly, carefully, like dressing him for the first time. Or the last. She didn't fasten it. She didn't touch his hair. She just smoothed the edge along his collar, then stepped back, and stepped back again, and again, until she reached Mabel. Echo turned. The mother rose. They walked toward the mist. And then, just before they vanished into it, the sound. 3 knocks. Very slow, very deep. From the trees, not from them. Like something older marking the end of something tender. And then they were gone. No cry, no shout, no backward glance. Only the wind remained. Mabel placed her hand in Hollis's. Hollis didn't squeeze it. Just let it stay there, warm. They stood until the light left the sky. Until the trees turned to outlines. Until the stones looked like teeth again. Then they walked back without a word. That night no one spoke. That night no one cooked. No radio. No harmonica. Only cedar smoke rising from the shallow tray on the porch, curling into the dark. The next morning, before sun had fully cleared the edge of the ridge, Hollis stepped outside. She wasn't sure why. She wasn't looking for anything. But it was there just the same, on the cabin porch, laid gently on the rail. A small woven square, not fabric, not thread, made of bark and grass and fine root, braided with care, and in the center, a thin strip of blue. Not dyed, not cloth, just a blue thread laid into the weave like a memory, like a whisper. She picked it up with both hands, held it against her chest, and listened. The trees didn't knock that morning, but they didn't need to. Because sometimes silence doesn't mean absence. Sometimes it means someone is still watching, still nearby, still waiting for the next rhythm, even if it takes years. The snow came early that winter. Not in drifts, not in blizzards. Just a soft dusting, like a secret lay gently across the land. It clung to porch rails and fence posts, gathered in quiet corners where no wind reached. On the Greeley property, it softened the edges of everything, roof lines, ruts in the earth, even the worn footprints that led from the barn to the house. Nothing looked sharp anymore. Everything had rounded off into silence. Inside the county courthouse in Weaverville, the lights buzzed overhead with the same tired hum they always carried. The paint on the walls had faded to a pale gray, and the radiator clicked like a distant metronome. The hearing was called to order on a Thursday morning. Early December. First snow still fresh on the sidewalk outside. Harlan sat beside Hollis at the long wooden table. His flannel shirt was buttoned all the way up, the collar stiff with starch. She wore her coat the whole time, fingers tucked inside the sleeves. Her hair was tied back, her boots still crusted with pine needles. Across from them sat Darla, her hair styled, her posture perfect, but her eyes hollow like something she was pretending not to miss. The judge leaned back in his chair and looked over the paperwork without speaking for a long time. Then Dr. Bates stepped forward. His boots echoed once against the floor. He placed one hand on the rail and said just one thing. "I only know what I've seen," he said. "And what I've seen are people who keep their word." That was all. There were no questions after that. The gavel came down softer than expected. Guardianship remained. Darla's visitation rights were acknowledged but supervised. And just like that, it was done. The courthouse emptied slow, like the air had thickened. No one rushed. Outside, the sky had turned the color of smoke. Hollis stepped into it like someone stepping off a ledge and found herself still standing. Later that night, at home, Mabel finished the last quilt. She called it "Carry You Until." The letters were stitched in a darker thread this time, not blue but brown, earth-toned, the kind of color that didn't fade. She folded it once and laid it across the back of the chair beside the hearth. Not to be used, just to be known. On the porch, the wind moved the chimes but didn't ring them. The cedar smoke had faded to memory. The porch rail was bare. No stones, no feathers, no bark. But the wood still remembered where they'd been. That week, Buck Ransom left town. No one stopped him. No one asked where he was headed. After the mess near Canyon Creek, the mill had cut ties. Word had spread about his obsession with the thing in the woods, about the fake calls, the cans, the traps, the risk he'd taken in dry season. He didn't fight the decision. He just packed up and vanished like someone late for a train no one else could see. Nobody celebrated, nobody mourned. He was gone, and that was enough. Days passed. Snow thickened. The town leaned into winter. But every now and then, after dark, the Greeley cabin would echo with soft sounds, not from inside. A slow knock, then another. Sometimes 3, sometimes one long, 2 short. Sometimes nothing at all, but always something behind the stillness. Hollis didn't run to the door anymore. She didn't need to. She just tapped twice on the frame, always the same. "We're still here." And once, on a morning after fresh snowfall, a single new mark appeared on the porch. A small woven piece, made of bark and root. No fabric, no thread, but tucked in the center, carefully wrapped, was a narrow twist of something familiar. Hair, her own, braided from a fallen strand, woven into the heart of something living. The message was clear. "I remember you too." In the weeks that followed, Mabel returned to her sewing slowly, not to replace what had been, but to anchor what remained. She stitched quietly in the mornings, her thimble catching light like dew. She didn't name the quilts anymore. Just let them become whatever the hands needed them to be. Harlan fixed the eastern fence. He added cedar slats to the old gate, not to keep things out, just to make space for something returning. Hollis started walking again. Same path every dusk. She didn't bring the harmonica anymore. Just tapped a stick against the cedar stump 3 times and waited. Most evenings there was no answer. But one night, a week before Christmas, the forest tapped back. Not with a rhythm, but with a presence. She looked up and saw nothing, but felt everything. She turned home without a word. That evening the wind blew in from the north, dry and brittle. The cabin lights flickered once, then held steady, and on the porch, laid carefully atop the old nail by the door frame, hung a new braid. Fresh, still green, bark not yet dried. It wasn't long, it wasn't fancy, but it was tight, well made, and tied at the base with a single knot that looked like a loop. A loop someone would remember how to undo. Some stories aren't meant to be told in full. They're meant to be felt, carried in silence, passed through touch, remembered in the spaces between words. And when they do rise to the surface, they come softly, like mist rolling off the treetops at dawn, or a knock in the quiet of night that asks nothing but to be heard. There are places in this world where time folds gently, where the rules we cling to start to loosen, and where what we think we know gives way to something deeper. In those places, the strongest things often go unseen. Love has no language there, only rhythm. Protection leaves no trail, only warmth. And family. Family sometimes looks nothing like us at all. We learn slowly that to care for something is not to own it, that to protect something is sometimes to let it go, and that there is a kind of faith in the act of waiting. Waiting without promise, without proof. Just belief that what was once lost might find its way again, if the path is kept clear and the door never fully closed. There is grace in the unfinished, in the unanswered, in the breath before the knock. It reminds us that kindness doesn't always arrive wrapped in reasons, that mercy has no clock, and that the things we offer in quiet, warmth, shelter, ritual, memory, sometimes echo further than the things we shout. Somewhere out in the woods, something still listens, something still remembers. And perhaps that's the point. Not to understand everything, not to solve the mystery, but to live in a way that leaves room for it. Room for wonder, for reverence, for the in-between. Because the world is wider than we know, and what we fear in the shadows may be reaching toward us not with hunger, but with hope. Thank you for walking this path with us. If this story found its way to your heart, we invite you to leave a comment, share your thoughts, or simply let us know you were here. And if you'd like to journey with us again, be sure to subscribe and follow this channel. Your presence helps keep these stories alive, one quiet heartbeat at a time.